Okay, today on the Blair Technique podcast, I've got Dr. Alex Wolfe with me again, doing a solo show here without Dr. Kevin Pecca, but the show must go on and it will. And so I'm pumped to have a conversation with Dr. Wolfe. We're both sort of the same generation of Blair chiropractors, kind of on the lower end of the experience spectrum, newer in practice within the first 5, 6, 8 years. And so as far as that goes, I think we can have a different conversation than we would with someone who's been practicing for 40 years. And so I hope to bring a lot of value for young docs and students on this one and just, share about Dr. Wolfe's experiences. So Alex, if you would just introduce yourself, tell us about your practice and where you guys are and maybe how you got into the Blair work, and we can just jump off from there.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me on, John. My name is Dr. Alex Wolfe, and I'm Blair cervical chiropractor. I've been practicing in just south of my hometown here in Metamora, Michigan for 5 years now. It'll be 5 years coming up next month. And so my wife and I practice together at our office, Wolfe Family Chiropractic in Metamora, Michigan. We have two independent contractors in the office as well, Dr. Ramneek Bogle and Dr. Stephanie O'Neill Bogle. And so we are kind of a really interesting blend of different specialties and practices and stuff. And I think we'll get into that a little bit later. But I graduated from Palmer College Chiropractic in Davenport, Iowa in 2015. And I did my preceptorship, and I did a little internship with the Navy out in California for a period of time. And then my wife and I, or fiance at the time, got together and we opened this office pretty much from scratch. So we didn't buy out an existing office, or we didn't buy a book of business. We just kind of went right ahead and said, if we're going to build something, let's build it the way we want it from the ground up. And so sometimes I regret that decision. It's definitely not the easy way to do things. Yeah. Opening a cash office that's upper cervical in a town that's never had either. And so kind of planted our own flag, and we've been going strong ever since. So I got into Blair when I was a student at Palmer. I always knew I wanted to be a chiropractor. So like if you pull out my 10th grade or my senior yearbook from high school, it has, what are you gonna be doing in 10 years? I missed that almost exactly by one child. So I said, in 10 years, I'll be practicing as a chiropractor with my wife and a couple of kids. And I only had one kid at that time. So wow. I was just missed it by a hair. So I knew I always wanted to be a chiropractor. I grew up playing sports. I had a number of what we now would call concussions back then. It was just like attaboys, rung his bell type of thing. Right?
Yeah.
And so I grew up around chiropractic. Saturdays after football games, we would go to the chiropractor, and I'd get straightened out and ready for the week ahead. I always viewed it as kind of a musculoskeletal pain approach to natural wellness. And so I was really appreciative for what chiropractic did for me and kept me on the ball field and everything. But so that's what I went to chiropractic school thinking I was getting into. I got to Palmer. Really excited. The reputation of Palmer was something that I was really stoked to be there and ready to learn and get excited and dig in. And so I started digging around a little bit. Your first couple of tries, it's all the hard sciences, and you don't really talk a lot about chiropractic. You don't get into philosophy too much. You don't really, scratch the surface of what makes chiropractic unique and different. And so I started asking around. I ended up, at a town nearby. I went to a few Troxel internship programs and was learning about Gonstead technique, and really saw the appreciation and the value of having a system in place, an x-ray analysis system, an adjusting system, and, using objective measures to figure things out. And I really loved Gonstead for that reason. And so I started getting adjusted in the student clinic, and I was really excited about, helping those upper tri people figure it out. And so just throwing myself at the mercy of students that were just barely figuring it out themselves. And I was always a migraine sufferer, right? Like, so from probably, I suspect some of those head injuries from when I was in football and some other things. I had always struggled with migraines, but they would be, once every couple of months. And if I could get to sleep, I'd live through it and live to tell the tale. So about the time I got to Palmer and was getting the student clinic, we were starting to see an uptick in those migraines, and stress, everything else was, kind of hit me hard. And so I went to my fourth trimester at Palmer. You have a toggle recoil class. And so at the time, my instructor for that was the great Dr. John Strzerzewski. And so Dr. Strzelecki taught me my first kind of rendition of upper cervical, and really laid on the importance of specificity and doing it right, doing it slow and methodically, and figuring it out and doing it the right way. So I was really growing and excited about that, seeing another technique system kind of evolve in my head. And so then at the very end of that trimester, if you learn everything, do everything right, and you're partnered with a person, you get to perform your first chiropractic adjustment in your chiropractic career at that moment. And so I did my adjustment, and I was, very at that time like, yeah, move that atlas. Yeah, it was awesome. And so, I got my gold star for the day, and I was excited. And then I laid down thinking, all right, here's another student that's just gonna, slam my neck around, and hopefully I don't get a migraine. And you hear the stories of like Dr. Rosa and that Ed McMahon interview of like the toilet bowl flushing and how he got an adjustment and then just felt like totally different. I got an adjustment and I felt totally different for about 3 minutes. And so that to me was like, there was this little glimmer of something like that seemed more than just a sympathetic response, right?
Mm.
So I started digging around, started getting adjusted under toggle care, and would get like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days of this just immense clarity,
Mm.
where not only were my migraines starting to get better, but I felt like a much smarter and better version of myself. And so um, they said, well, it seems like it's sort of working. You're having such good results. Go over see this guy who it turned out to be Dr. Todd Hubbard in the outpatient clinic. And so Dr. Hubbard kind of went through my workup and got some Blair films on me, went through that whole process. That was the first time I got to actually see the whole inner workings of what Blair's all about. Got me under Blair care, and that's where I started getting the consistency. And so I went from 2 or 3 days at a time to weeks at a time or months at a time. And so for me, I was always a good student that worked hard to be a good student. By the time I graduated Palmer, I was doing really well in school, but I was also editing the school paper, and I was teaching anatomy tutoring, and I was in a leadership society, and I was president of student council. And I was doing all these other things too that I would have never had the bandwidth or the acuity to be able to deal with had I not found Blair. So that's kind of my story of how I ended up where I ended up.
Yeah, that's powerful. Shout out to Dr. Hubbard, for being a consistent beacon there at Palmer College, and just how many students he's trained. I don't even innumerable.
Yeah.
But I think if you're a student listening, you should pay attention and find a good local field doc to take good care of your spine. I mean, my God, just thinking about all of the, oh man, all the manipulations and all the work, had done. It's no wonder I was the most sick and stressed out in school with so much input.
Yeah.
So I kind of came at it in a similar way, Gonstead being the kind of the gateway to upper cervical care because of, their system of analysis that I, thought eliminated a lot of the guesswork. And then, with the upper cervical rationale and understanding, what you're talking about, which is the hydrodynamic aspect of it, the blood and CSF flow through the cranial vault and through the skull, and hydrating and nourishing the brain, and how that affects people's, not just like you said, bandwidth and acuity, but long-term health trajectory. I mean, that was like, holy smokes, I have to do this. There's a guy on every corner, that can help with a hot low back. But what about these people with, with these types of issues? Who's gonna be there for them? So, and similarly, started to practice right after school, which is definitely not the uh, common wisdom as far as what to do after graduation. So I'd love to, especially for students that are listening, or docs that are maybe in an associate position and curious about that transition, moving out on their own. What you could share with us about your startup process, what it was like getting back to Michigan and just starting in on building a brand new practice.
Yeah. So when I was in school, there was a local doc that was a kind of a mentor of mine growing up. I'd do the yard work at his office and stuff like that. And he kind of pushed me towards Palmer. And so we had kind of talked about what would it look like if I bought his existing office. And I was still in school, and he was using an instrument Pulsar system that was kind of like a computer aided adjusting system. And it was cool. I mean, he started out as an activator doc. Way back, he actually, his first rendition of his office, he was a Grostic doctor.
Wow.
And so, and he did that. And so when I was getting ready to start, I was like, I'm not really into the pull start thing. And he really wanted someone to take that over and champion that. And so he found another local young doctor that took that over. And that was just a better fit. And so no hard feelings there, but it was, they go to our church. And so when they found out I was moving back to the area and I was going to open an office, him and his wife invited me over for breakfast one morning. And so we're sitting there and, they're drinking their smoothies, their green smoothies and everything like that, like living the life. And
Yeah.
we're just talking, and he's a like 1968 Palmer grad.
Wow.
And so he'd been around the block a few minutes. And so we got to talking, and I told him what I wanted to do and what I was all about. And he very, very much opposed me trying to open an upper cervical clinic. He said it was going to be so hard. It was going to be nothing but turmoil, and people around here don't get it, and it's just going to be nothing but. And so I have a habit of pushing back when people tell me not to do something, or as long as I believe in it.
Yeah.
And so I did not listen to his advice. So we looked around for real estate. We found an existing office that had previously been a chiropractic office. So I moved into a building that had held, not necessarily failed, but that it was not still a chiropractic office for a reason.
Yeah.
So it had always been a chiropractic office, but it's an old farmhouse. And so, but it had a rad room. It had, the leaded shielded room and everything. It was ready to roll. So my overhead costs weren't exorbitant. But we got a loan, and so I don't know if you got numbers or anything, but we took out like $120,000 loan, kind of updated everything, got it all painted, cleaned up, ready to roll. Bought all the equipment. About half of that loan was a DR, top of the line X-ray system, which is now, of course, antiquated. But and so which I love using every day, but and I love paying that bill when it comes. But that was the startup cost basically. And so we opened the office and did like a soft opening in April. I was from the area, so I already had an established relationship through church and through school and just living in this area my whole life. And so a lot of the first people that came were people I sort of knew, or friends and family of people that I knew. And then from there, it was, how do we build this? How do we grow? I'd hung out with people that were big into screenings. And I think that is an absolute honest way to make a living and get an office built. I never felt like that was for me. And I don't know if that was just lack of security, I had insecurities about my ability to communicate it in that way. It always felt really forced for me to go and do screenings and stuff. So I did a couple when I was at different offices, shadowing and whatnot. And so I did a couple like health events, like health focused things where I would go there and be there, and I had my SAM machine, but I never felt right about the whole, like, let's just cookie cutter this. And so it felt, for me, it felt really hard for me to fake the actual excitement and that goes along with it. I like being a little bit off the cuff. And so I probably could have grown a lot faster if I'd done screenings, but I didn't. And so we just kind of grew organically. We got a little bit of Google traction. We got some reviews out there. We were active on Facebook in our area. When we moved here, there was 12 chiropractors in the area around us. And I think I was the second one with a website.
Wow.
2016, right? So that gives you a little bit of an idea.
Huge opportunity there for you.
So that helped us out quite a bit, just kind of being young and energetic and willing to use some of the technology that was out there. And so then my wife joined me in practice 6 months later after she graduated from Palmer. And we've been at it ever since. And so I think about, I've learned a lot about what not to do. I like learning things, and sometimes I have to learn them the hard way. There was nobody in this area that had a reasonable kind of office or that was doing anything like this.
Yeah.
So there was no real option to precept or to take over associate. And so I love the area, and that's kind of how I ended up here.
Yeah. Very similar for me. I mean, it was, I wasn't really willing to sacrifice certain personal and professional values to just take a job here, just to kind of get established. And shout out to my wife. I mean, she was kind of the one to really, motivate me and say, if you're just going to go working as an associate and be disgruntled for 2 years to just start a practice anyway,
Yeah.
What are you going to have? A little bit more money then, let's just do it now.
Yeah.
In which case, that gave me enough courage to go for it. But same thing, learned a lot. I mean, as far as the screenings go, it's things just change over time, and each community is a little bit different with how you can interface and integrate with the people in a way that is approachable and resonates with them. So for us, for example, I did a handful of screenings, but every one I went to, there were like 5 other chiropractors, and they all had a better offer than me.
Right.
So in my mind, I thought, why compete over the same patients at this event on price, as opposed to look at different strategies. So I can relate, on that aspect of it. And for students that are listening, or young docs that are trying to, focus on, and how do I get that initial momentum going? And there's really not one way, unfortunately. There are a lot of systems, there are a lot of mentors and coaches that will give you everything you need to start the process. But ultimately, I think it comes down to you, your values, your community, how hard you're willing to work, where you can be, what you can do, with
Yeah.
your resources and your time. And the cool thing about it is you can reach people many, many different ways. And so there's quite a bit of variability, to how you can actually get that done. But it is frustrating trying to find your way.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean to be critical of screenings, right? Like it was just wasn't for me. And so I think it's important, like as a student, go out and do some, right?
Yeah.
Go volunteer at a Blair doctor's office or an upper cervical doctor's office and just get out there and do it, because there's scripts out there. There's all this great information. I'm not saying it's the wrong way to do it, but you'll know pretty quickly, I think, if that's the way you want to build your office. And so you
Right.
might find the comfort and the security of like knowing like this is how the whole interaction goes. And I think like I worked with spoke with some people like Dr. Lenars. He's got a very good system in place. And you want to talk about like methodically, I think you can take that system to just about anywhere and grow an office. And I think that's the genius in his system and his way of doing things. I was probably always going to have a very tailored office to my personality, right? Like I don't think I was ever going to have an office that was built on 5 or 6 main tenets that somebody else put forth. It was always going to be me, and I like being able to step outside the box and fiddle and change and do those things. But I think you need to get out and try it, because I know people that have built amazingly huge and successful offices all on the backbone of screening. And so to each their own.
Yeah.
Do you have Dr. Evans? Is he or Dr. Bell, or not Rashay? Dr. Beebe?
We've not had them yet. No.
Okay. So I think you're going to students, if you're out there listening and you see that name pop up when you get to, the future podcast, you're going to kind of get a really good taste of like the provider networking side of things.
Right.
And I'm not even pretend like I can explain it or guide you on that better than they can. So I'll save that for them. But that's really where we grew the most, was, getting those providers educated so that they can refer intelligently, and that, patients understand like, okay, we're working with other doctors. We're not these isolated, it's me versus the world chiropractors out there. And so that was a big step forward for us too.
Yeah. And ultimately, these different strategies have different timelines associated with them, right?
Yeah.
Building a provider of communities is something that does take years, and takes consistency in terms of your energy output and things like that, and referring patients and reporting on patients and all that sort of thing. Whereas the screenings would be a way to, generate some interest more quickly,
Right.
and start to fill your book sooner than later. Same with lead gen or any types of digital marketing and stuff like that. So I think it's smart. And I know Dr. Beebe actually at the Blair seminar, maybe, or conference, maybe not last year, the year before, talked about some of these different timelines and cycles, and how to work on a few different strategies that kind of cohesively build a more comprehensive system of, letting the community know what you have to offer, and where you are. So I think it's smart to, work on all those different areas. But marketing aside, give us a sense of maybe some of the growing pains of those first few years. And congratulations on 5 years, by the way. That's a pretty significant milestone. So you guys should be proud.
Yeah, they always say like most businesses fail in the first 3 years, and then hit 3 years, and then I heard a new statistic about they mostly fail in the first 5 years. It's like, oh man, so like I feel like I'm shooting at a moving target here, but I think we're here to stay now. But so initially the hardest part for me was, we grew up we moved to an area where probably less than half the docs have any sort of x-ray in-house. And so, you move to an area where the standard of care is very much, the farmer's done in the field. He comes and may or may not get an exam, and, is on the table and adjusted, and he's out. And it's been, all of 5 minutes. And so one thing we knew from the get-go is we didn't want to deal with third-party insurers. And so we said, we're going to spend our time focusing on patient care, and we're going to spend our time giving the patient our attention. And so for us, we priced ourselves, I'm not going to say competitively, but within reason. And so we didn't go too crazy with our pricing, but all that money was going to be dedicated towards our time being spent with the patient. So I think that's kind of how we hung our hat was, the thoroughness of our exam, the completeness of our history. There was times in my first early years, I had the time. And so, those first few patients, I overspent as far as energy and time. And it was hard to pull back from that initially, because there was times where like my new patient initial visit, because I had the time, like, yeah, I'll spend 3-4 hours with you figuring this out. And so go through and take an hour-long history and go through and do an hour-long exam and then go through the x-rays and rest them for, 40 minutes and doing all these things. And so, and then you start to get busy, right? And then people call and they're like, hey, I spent 3 hours with me. And somebody else just shows up and like, well, I guess we're gonna have to do it in 2.5 because I'm a little busier today. And so, refining that a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
But then also explaining to people why the value is there. So it's easy for people to see it once they're in your office, but trying to explain to them, why they should come in, why they should pay out of pocket, why they should risk not being reimbursed by their insurance, and why you're only going to adjust their neck and not their, their throbbing XYZ. And so that's the hard part, I think, is there was never a good upper cervical presence. I think the closest upper cervical doc when we opened this office was going to be probably about an hour and a half away. And so there was people up here traveling down to the Metro Detroit area to get care. They were driving right past our office. And so once they found us, they transitioned here.
Cool.
So there's people out there, there's people everywhere that know about upper cervical. And that's the cool thing. It's like, I have people for me that drive, 3, 4, 5 hours to get here because they recognize it and they value it. And I'm an hour closer than the guy they were going to before.
Yeah.
And so there are people out there. It's just making yourself visible, making it easy to connect. So we got on all the directories. Are you on James Beadle's ucreferral.com?
There's so many of them now. I don't even remember all the different ones.
When I started, it was just Upsea Spine.
Yeah.
Which was like, it's a great resource, but there's people that on there that have been deceased now for like 10 years that still have an active listing and stuff. So it was a little antiquated, but and there was no standard on there. So you could just like fill out a listing and you pretty much would get your name on there. So there's people that was like, yeah, I do toggle. And then they have like every other technique in the world listed as well. But,
right.
So yeah, that's how we got going. And then some of the problems that we had too, like early on, I worked with my wife. And so we were in school and we went and picked up a toggle table from a doc in Iowa. And while we were there, the guy's like, so are you guys going to practice together? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, all I can say is, get a monthly marriage counselor appointment set up and, you guys will be okay. And that really freaked me out because, and he's like, yeah, he's like, it is hard. And so that was a little disconcerting to me, but the hardest part I had from a clinical side was how do you communicate the benefits and what makes upper cervical different without running down chiropractic? Right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So many upper cervical marketing strategies, everything. It's like, well, this is the difference between upper cervical chiropractic and, general chiropractic. They say it with that kind of like backhanded, like, it's a term, but they say it almost like it's a lesser form. And so there are a lot of interesting conversations that happened in those early times about like, well, this is what a specific adjustment can do. And my wife would say something to the effect of like, I'm specific too. And it's like, well, yeah, but, and then you stop and you think like, no, you are like, she's a solid, specific chiropractor, just utilizing different techniques. And so, we spent a lot of time talking about the merits of the office and then, trying to talk about each individual merit of each technique rather than trying to double down on, upper cervical is better than other chiropractors. And so, which I think we tend to fall into. And it's like, it's one of those, like you're standing in the boat while you're shooting holes in the bottom of it. Cause as much as upper cervical is unique and distinct, it's still chiropractic. So,
excuse me. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's easy, especially early on, when you're so proud of what you're doing to, in that hour-long consultation, just go on and on and on about, all of that technical differentiation. But does it make the decision that much easier for folks or not? I don't really know. But in the grand scheme of things, lately, I've been using this term more and more. I'm just a fan of putting points on the scoreboard for chiropractic.
Yeah.
We do have a central set of systems and um, philosophical constructs and principles that the profession is built on. In my humble opinion, I think upper cervical and Blair specifically is the best way to apply those principles through the science and art of chiropractic. But at the same time, it doesn't really build us up to chip away at our brothers and sisters that are maybe don't know what we know or have had the experiences that we've had. And so I definitely have had to grow out of that myself. And I think more than anything, I was trying to convince myself, more than the patient, that I'm worth your time and investment here to take good care of you. So um, that's all stuff that you also have to develop, right? As you're a business owner for the first time and you're a brand new doc and you've got all these different things that you're so inexperienced in that are all kind of working at the same time. There's a lot of proficiency to build, circum or sort of like concurrently. So uh, I was going to ask you about what it's like to practice with your wife, because that adds just another layer, which is you guys, your whole life is, the office and chiropractic. Um, so tell us about, maybe just briefly, like what's her sort of area of expertise in chiropractic, and how do you guys kind of integrate on the patient care side of things within the office?
Yeah, so she started off doing a lot of pregnancy and pediatrics, and really kind of more gravitated towards the pregnancy side of things. And so we have another doc now that does a lot of the pediatric stuff in the office, Dr. Stephanie O'Neill Bogle. But so she started off that way, and so it was kind of easy figuring out like, okay, lower back complaint, you go to see Dr. Hannah. Upper cervical, anything head neck related, you go to see Dr. Alex. And then from there, it's just, case history complexity. So if it's something that it was like, they had a rollover accident, or they've had long, complicated chronic issues, then it kind of gravitated more towards me. And so there was times where we really struggled with patient attribution, right? Like who ended up going where. But it was okay, and I will say the nice thing about having a full spine chiropractor in the office with me, and that I've really grown to appreciate it. She went through the Blair primary at Palmer. And so she
Awesome.
gets it, she understands it. And she's, and more often than not, if somebody's going to adjust me, like if you have an ASR, ASL with my angles, she's the person to do it, because she does that adjustment pretty frequently. And so, but that's the thing is, she gets, she understands it. So that ended up creating a lot more qualified patients coming my way. And so people were calling because the reputation of the office was really good, and they knew Wolfe Family Chiropractic could get them well. And so she would, maybe take on a lower back complaint. And then through the course of the history, it was like, they were ticking all the boxes for upper cervical care. And so, they were there for a hot low back that day, but they also get migraines, and they also have vertigo, and they've got all these other things going on. And so they may start with her and then, naturally just transition to me to kind of get the ball rolling on some of those other concerns. And so that actually turned into a huge blessing, because I have other doctors in the office to lean on. And now it's, as we're having these conversations within, a 4-doctor office, it's like, oh, my wife has migraines. Can you do anything like that? I'm like, well, actually, Dr. Alex, he's got this tool set that is really helpful in that realm. And then, somebody else comes in and like, oh, my wife's hormones are all over the place. It's like, oh, Dr. Bogle's got this functional medicine skill set that is awesome for that. And so that helped out a lot. The hardest part about being a spouse or being in business with your spouse is when you shut it off, right? And so we go home, and when you're young, you got all the energy in the world, right? And so it doesn't matter because everything's exciting, and you're like, we don't have kids, we're just trying to grow this business. And like for the first year, we talked about it constantly, and we were both on board with it. The second year, I talked about it constantly, and then she was a little less on board with that. And then year 3 and 4, I talked about it constantly, and she's not feeling as excited. And so, she's a morning person. I'm a night owl. And so like we're, in the morning, she wants to talk business and I want to drink my coffee. And at night, I want to talk business and she wants to go to bed. And so, trying to come together and like plan times to actually talk about some of these bigger things that need to happen. And so, it gets hard. We kind of created this situation in our personal life where, she was going to quarterback, if there was any decisions that were just going to be made without, unilaterally at the off or at the house, that was just going to be her. Right. So we have a son now. And so, if daycare needs an answer, they know, just call Dr. Hannah and they'll get the answer, and and, we talk about it and kind of coordinate after the fact. If there's a business decision that needs to happen, she gives me the latitude to be able to make those decisions without, I always do check in, but without having to check in. And there's a balance there, and just trying to, make sure that you're communicating without stepping on each other's toes, and being able to recognize that if you don't take time and set aside and not talk about your business, then your life outside of the office and inside the office can become very complicated and kind of just really touchy. And so it's been a very rewarding experience. Now 5 years in, I wouldn't do it any other way. But yeah, sometimes it'd be a lot easier if I just got to do everything and make up my own mind and make all the decisions and do it my way. But that's not what this is about. So
Yeah, it's easy to think something else would be easier, right? It would just be a different type of challenge, and that's one thing about you kind of got to wrap your head around is if you start a practice, is it's just there's difficulties, right? Like that's just comes with the territory. Anybody who's ever started a business of any kind and has had to, invest the time and the equity into building it is runs up against difficulties. And some folks, may get over those hurdles quicker than others, but you're going to encounter, similar speed bumps. And so that evolution over 5 years, I'm really interested in this idea of the first 5 years of practice and what that does to set the tone for, what happens next and how you sort of evolve beyond that point in time, because it's really man, it goes so fast. I mean, everybody says that, but we're 4 years here. And it just seems like we're just starting to really hit our stride with understanding our positioning within the community, what we have to offer, systems dialed in, all the tools we need, under one roof, and all these different sorts of things that you just have to grow into over time. So there are definitely the quick starts, the quick fast up starts. I know Dr. Bell was one of those when we talked to her on it might have been at the Blair conference a couple of years ago. She's talking about, she took off like a rocket and has not slowed down since. But that's not everybody's aspiration. That's not everybody's experience. So it's kind of good to know, what's out there and what it's like in the real world. So if you were to kind of project, over the next 5 years, do you guys have something in mind, a vision of a practice that you're working towards with these 4 docs or anything beyond that?
yeah, so our goal from the early, even just beginning planning phases of this was to create a multidisciplinary space and have access to like-minded professionals within under one roof. And so we didn't really know what that was going to look like. So when we first started, it was just my wife and I, and then we incorporated massage therapy. And right now we have an awesome massage therapist, Dara, that is really driven into craniosacral therapy.
Wow.
And so she does a lot of other stuff, but like her passion's more down that craniosacral therapy path. And so if you don't, as a student, if you don't know anything about craniosacral therapy, I highly encourage you to go check it out and learn about that. It goes very well with upper cervical chiropractic, and having those resources in your community can make a huge impact for some of those difficult patients or patients that have those overlying psychosomatic things going on. So that was our first kind of addition, was massage therapy. And then we didn't think it was going to happen quite so quickly, but the 2 doctors that are with us now, there was some stuff changing around in their lives, and they were looking to move and kind of find their way back to the Midwest. And over a few drinks one day, we just got to talking and said, hey, there's space for you in our office. And that kind of evolved. And I think within less than a year, they had all their stuff packed up from California, and we're practicing here. So we pushed it. I think that wouldn't have happened that quickly if it weren't those 2 people. I'm a big believer in things happening the way they need to. And so I think the timing was right for them to join us. And so that kind of bumped us ahead a few years there. But long term, anything that's congruent with our philosophy of natural health and getting people well and really taking care of people, and not just I don't envision there ever being a cookie cutter practitioner in any office that I'm in control of. I really believe that the individual is unique and requires a mind that's willing to uh, coordinate and be able to kind of balance those unique traits and be able to move forward and be flexible and their clinical reasoning and rationale, and be able to really go above and beyond and care about the patients. And so whatever specialties, I think it's whatever people fit that mold, they'll be welcome with their specialty in our office. And so, I would love to one day have an acupuncturist in the office. I'd love to have someone that was really into uh, like Dr. Bogle does a lot with medication depletions and like how you're on these statins and how that impacts your nutritional deficiencies and things like that. But having a medical doctor that was forward thinking and does some of that as well, I think would be a benefit to us. But yeah, so the door's wide open on that end of things. But I think it's really about the personality of the individual more so than the specialty that they practice. And so,
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation around culture, within a business. And I think that's what you're probably speaking to, which
mhm.
is if you've got four folks that are like-minded and on the same page with, how to proceed in co-managing, these folks and working towards the same core values within your business, that's everything. And it seems like it's a great opportunity. I mean, every community is a little different again. And here in Colorado Springs, sort of talking about networking with providers, um, I actually got a smaller office, downgraded my size of my space here last year and doubled down on the provider relationships, uh, sort of going in that direction more so than like you were talking about, kind of this multidisciplinary, thing. I very much like to be in my niche. And so it's great that in our community we have resources available for folks in all these different areas. And not every community has that option. So depending on where you are, you may be the one to, bring a lot of new ideas, to the market, which is, I think, an awesome opportunity within chiropractic. One of the things I love in chiropractic is there's so much variety that, so many styles of practice and ways that you can express your values rather than just kind of getting a job in a large system, healthcare system, for example, where you're, an employee. So it's definitely comes with its challenges, but man, what a phenomenal opportunity. And I know if we were to pull someone off the street in 5 years and met them more and ask them, where do you go for natural help? I'm sure Wolfe Family Chiropractic or whatever you're calling it at that time will
yeah.
be top of mind. So wishing you guys all the best of luck on that. I have no doubt that you'll do it.
One
Um,
thing I'll say real quick for students, because you mentioned or you alluded to the name change. It's like when we started, it was putting the name on the front door it was a point of pride for me, and it was like it made it easy for people to find us. Chiropractic, I think, was like we wanted that to be at the center of everything, and so we're looking at rebranding right now and going through that conversation of like how do we make this more inclusive and things like that. And so had we gone back, I don't know if I would have changed anything, but it was like we want to do it this way, but I didn't really have the branding thing in place, and so there is a small setback that comes with rebranding that we're recognizing as well. Like you got to reestablish a little bit, but so if you're thinking about doing something like this, maybe put that on the forefront and keep that in mind. So,
Words of wisdom. Yeah, you
yeah,
can always pivot and you can always make changes if you need to, but don't if you don't have to, right?
yeah.
Specifically with Blair work, now talk to me about like how you developed your proficiency within the technique, because I know starting to practice, right out of school, even with a preceptorship or internships and things like that, it's not a tremendous amount of experience to then go manage cases as a solo doc in the field without, someone looking over your shoulder. So talk to me about maybe your own education within Blair, how you sought out resources and some of the maybe hiccups you had along the way learning the technique and things that you've learned that you might be able to share with students to kind of cut the learning curve a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a big hands-on person, and like even in Palmer, I learned best by teaching others, and
Mm,
so I took the Blair elective. So in Palmer, the primary and intermediate are kind of combined into a 2 weekend course, and usually Dr. Forrest comes, and him and Todd Hubbard were kind of in charge of that at that time, and so I took it the first time, and then I took it the second time. I think the third time around, I just basically hung out and helped teach it, or not really teach it, but I was there to kind of show students where the X-ray marking things were. And so repeated exposure is definitely a big thing for me. But I'll say, when you're a student, if you have access to these seminars and you're serious about Blair, do it at school, because it is much easier to get there and give up a weekend and get that immersion than it is to walk away from practice and your family and everything else going on. And like, I've been wanting to go down to Texas and spend a week with Gordon Elder and just like get inside his brain for a little bit. And that's one thing that it's really hard to do when you have a business and kids and everything else. And so you have to take the opportunity as it's coming. And so the other thing is different instructors, because, I'm in the diplomate, the upper circle diplomate program right now. And so every time I talk, like talking to Dr. Hafer and talking to Dr. Elder and talking with Dr. Jordan Jensen, who's in the diplomate with us, and Scott Baker, and everybody in that realm, it's like every time you have somebody else explain it, it comes out just a little bit differently, and you get just it's like taking the x-rays, right? Every view you get a slightly different angle, and then by the end of it, you've got a pretty complete picture of what's going on. And so I like having other people explain things to me. And, when somebody starts talking, I try to do my best to drop every preconceived notion about what's been going on before that. I'll ask the questions and things, but I try to go into it like I'm an infant almost every single time and just absorb everything they're saying. And then just add that to my Rolodex of information as I go. But so when I took that Blair elective at Palmer, that's where I first had my exposure to it. I practiced Blair in the student clinic, but then my ninth try, I went to California, and I worked on a naval air station in Lemoore, California. And so I was basically just musculoskeletal management and a lot of modalities and stuff like that. And I was able to do a little bit of upper cervical adjusting, but I didn't have access to, they wouldn't let me touch their x-ray machine and stuff like that. Like, federal government's really weird about like letting you just walk into rooms and touch stuff. So we did what we could. And then I went to my preceptorship, which was with Dr. Dan Judge down in Birmingham, Michigan. And that, I think, is where a lot of my like rapid growth and understanding and owning it came from, because I took a lot of his x-rays for that time. And so I would do the setup, and then I would run and grab him, and he would come and just say, "That looks good." And I take the x-ray. And so these poor patients had to wait there sometimes, if he was with a patient, for like, imagine trying to hold that base posterior position with the head clamps and everything for like 10 minutes. And so that helped me, because I wanted it to be good so that patients didn't have to wait there, and I didn't like having to be critiqued and have all that stuff changed. And so I got really good at taking x-rays down there, and then he would work with me on the adjusting. I didn't do any adjusting in his office on patients, but we would run through all the different setups and everything like that. And I think at that point he had an inkling. I don't think he might have had his intermediate instructor certification at that time, but now he's an advanced instructor. And so he was kind of trying to figure out how to teach it. And so we worked really well with each other for that time. And we would go out to lunch every day and just talk Blair and upper cervical and chiropractic. And so I really think that time helped me out a lot. And then when I got out on my own, there was that safety net was gone, right? And so we had, day one, I had this x-ray machine. I had all this knowledge that it was somewhere floating around, and I was pretty sure I knew how to implement it and, action it. And so taking the x-rays, and, I think the biggest thing is I was really scared about repeating an x-ray. I was nervous that if I had to repeat an x-ray, the patients were going to, look down on me, or they were going to think that I lacked competency, or which I did. There were things that times you just don't know it yet. And so I would try to work off of x-rays that were subpar, because I was too proud to admit that I made a mistake and want to take it again. And so I think that was a realization, when it's like, if you have a protractor where you have to really squint and turn your head, and like, almost like you're trying to like get inside their x-ray to figure it out, it's probably not good enough. And so going back and being willing to retake and get the appropriate information that you need. And then also going back and revisiting your listings, right? So I finally broke down and like got another license for our X-ray software so that I could have it on my workstation computer in my adjusting room so that I can pull up those X-rays and have access to them like at a moment's notice. And so being able to look at the patient and say, okay, I have it written down here what your listing was. But a lot of doctors will take the X-rays, and I don't know that they all review them regularly or look back at them, or it's the way that I was kind of taught. The way I saw it playing out in a lot of offices, you write the listings down, put the listings in your EHR, and then you work off of that. And so, looking at the X-rays a lot more frequently. There's a guy, I can't think of. I can never remember if it's Eddie Weller or Eddie Gigliotti, or there's one of them has like a monitor at the head of their table with the X-rays right on there. So it's like they've got basically the spine right above the spine. It's a really cool concept. I like that. I'm not as techie as that, but I think one day there'll be some iteration of that in my office. But being able to go back and say, maybe I got the listing wrong, right? Maybe I did it wrong. And when you find that, or even if you look at a few more X-rays, you go back and you're like, no, that's that second edge that they're talking about, or that's those are the things in the book that you start to realize, like, I got tricked and I need to backstep. And so really humbling yourself and recognizing, like, this technique was not just thrown together one day and
Right.
it like appear one day to Dr. Blair. It was work, and it was methodical in its formation, and there's a reason that manual exists, and it's there to get back into and learn and be able to recognize, like, even on I will fully admit in my hopefully my 40th 50th year of practice that I don't know it all. And so if I can't humble myself and learn at that point, then I probably should get out of it. So I think that those are some of the big things.
Yeah, and there is a pattern recognition aspect of it where the more ASRs you see, it becomes more familiar visually to you, and
Yeah.
what its characteristics are. And then there are the times where it doesn't, necessarily play by the rules. But that's where, man, if I could give a young doc or student any advice on on that specifically, it's like, just stick to the process. Like, learn how to mark the base properly, learn how to take the proper views, or even if you're using a CBCT, go through the same steps as if you're marking Blair X-rays, because what you're trying to understand is the rationale, the mechanisms of misalignment, the mechanics, why the listings are the way they are, how the corrections work, that kind of stuff. So don't skip steps, don't cut corners, or try to reinvent the wheel. I mean, the thing about the Blair technique is Dr. Blair started researching when he was like 2 years out of school, which blows my mind, and then
Right.
just kept it up all the way until he was actually no longer in practice. And Dr. Muncie was kind of his, liaison for experimenting with some of this stuff. So, like you said, if Dr. Blair can make a lifetime of research, out of it, I think we can all continue to work on improving, the details. We talked with Dr. Hillpish and some of the others that have been doing this for a long time, and they constantly reiterate the importance of doing the detailed steps correctly and not cutting corners with that stuff, because it all kind of adds up to ultimately the result that we want, which is clearing a patient out properly, getting them to hold their correction for as long as possible, getting the results that we all know that upper cervical, can deliver, and doing it with certainty and confidence, knowing that you have done all the prerequisite steps to make the most, beneficial outcome possible. So even if you have to go a little bit slower, like we were kind of joking earlier about taking way too long with patients, but if you're going to take the time, take it on the front end and get that information accurately so that you can eliminate the guesswork later. And to your point about the retakes, I think it's easy to feel that way, but man, how I would feel comforted by a doctor who is conscientious enough to want to get it exactly right before adjusting me. So it's man, it's what I love about the Blair technique, but it's also the thing that gives you the most grief, which is the importance of those tiny details and the steps.
When I started, on the front end before I took a protracto or an open mouth, those are the two that seem to be the most consistently difficult for me starting out. I would tell people, like, okay, like, so this one's really, like threading the needle, right? And kind of almost like lower expectations for a good outcome on the first one right away. And people understood it from that point. And it's like, and then I always showed people the X-rays after. I think I'm a big believer in, like, there were a lot of people that came and were really happy to see their x-rays after the fact. I didn't realize it was a standard of care to take x-rays and never show it to the patient.
Yeah.
And so there are people out there that do it. And I think Blair chiropractors, every office I've been in, they're at least pointing stuff out and going through it. But, you hear these horror stories about back in the 80s, they were showing people x-rays, not Blair, like other management companies. And it was like, so then you just have a bad x-ray and show that one to them because they don't know the difference and everything like that. And people really like to see their x-rays, and then you can kind of tell them the story about what's going on with their spine on their own imaging. But I'm curious, because John, did you ever work in a office where they did playing film, or did you ever
No,
do anything with playing film, really?
no, I started referring out for CBCTs as soon as I opened my practice, and then bought a machine myself.
I have such mixed feelings about this because I feel like, there's that rite of passage, like everyone should have to suffer through it like I did and figure it out. But it's also like, I keep looking at CBCTs like it's gonna, it will integrate in my office very quickly. But it's one of those things where I learned a lot taking the films. I don't know if that information is still useful or not, but I learned it. And so I think, if you have access to getting in as a student, or if you're, because I don't think there's any, well, I guess Sherman has a CBCT now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the only chiropractic college that?
Yeah, and it doesn't sound like currently it's very actively being
Okay.
used. So
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're in a Blair setting where you have the opportunity to practice it in the clinic, take an appreciation for what's going on with the films, because, I think x-ray is still a little bit cheaper to get into for the time being. And it's still a very, very valuable tool, but, there's a huge learning curve that comes along with just taking the x-rays. And so I think, learn it while you're on somebody else's time and you've got people around to help you.
yeah, it's reps. With all this stuff, it's just reps and finding where you're weak, finding areas to improve, whether it's your tissue pull, just staying over your contact, being more accurate with the distance that you're taking your Titron scans, getting proper leg checks. I mean, each little thing, there's always something to be working on and improving on. So that's the fun part about it, I think, is that it is really a system that it will work. If you apply the system, it will work. So you can be confident as a young doc, or someone fresh out of school, or maybe an associate that doesn't have a lot of experience. You'll get results because the system is sound. It just
Yeah.
becomes a matter of how efficiently and effectively can you apply the system. And so becoming more proficient in these steps will do that. So, but I know, very early on for me, and I've said this on the podcast before, my first Blair adjustment was the first patient I had in the practice I started after school,
Right.
outside of practicing and things like that. So I was leaning very heavily on the system, and I was, very pleased to find that it's a very sound, solid system that will get you better results. And one of the things that I had to overcome was thinking that someone else would have done a better job of it with the patient. Obviously, someone with more experience might have, got to the same result or the outcome a little bit quicker. But understanding that, in that time and in that moment, paying attention to what you're doing with the person is really the most important thing, and delivering the system to the best of your knowledge and proficiency. And the thing I love about the Blair Society is I didn't really know any of these Blair docs, when I got into it, but I just started hanging around and talking with folks and making connections. And now we've got, just so many mentors and folks that are rooting for us as younger docs and there to help support that development, in some of these fine tuning aspects of clinical care that, it's very approachable community, which I think is awesome. And to your point about different perspectives and different experiences, I mean, you're going to hear things different ways from different instructors, and just reconsider what you already know and own it a little bit better, which ultimately leads to better patient outcomes. So I love the point you made too about doing as many of those seminars as you can as a student. I mean, just think about, like, Dr. Forrest is going out of his way to come straight to you. I mean,
Right.
this guy who is the godfather of the technique at this point and has so much experience and wisdom and, mastery of the system. It's like, get around that guy or anybody else that as often as you can. It's way more affordable too. It costs you
Yeah.
way more as a doc to go do this
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
So cut the learning curve as much as possible.
Well, and I think shadowing too. So like we had a student in the office yesterday and today, And then tomorrow or Thursday, so in a couple of days, we have a young doctor from an hour or so away that's going to come in and spend the morning with me. And so I've never talked to a Blair doctor that said no when I asked them if I could shadow. And
Yeah.
so it didn't matter if I was in school or if I was a young doctor or what it was. And so when I was in California, I was in Dennis Campbell's office, I was in Dr. Forrest's office, Drew Hall. Like I was just all over the place. Anybody that would have me, and just wanting to see how everyone was doing it, because that's the other side of it. Is like you think you can take that technique and apply it, but it's really nice to see it applied in a business sense as well. But yeah, getting into the conferences, getting to the as many of the seminars as you can, talking to the Blair community is probably one of the most welcoming professional communities or professional organizations I've been associated with in my short career here. It is very much a group of friendly, happy people that are just there because they love chiropractic and they love what they can do with Blair Upper Cervical. And so I think I get excited about the prospect. Like I'm in the diplomate class and everything like that. But if you look at the things I'm excited about this year, it's like going to the Upper Cervical convention or the big conference and then going to the Blair conference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as a student, it is so cheap. Like I know everything's expensive when you're a student because it's all on student loans and everything, but man, you will be amazed at how expensive stuff gets when you become a doctor. And so
Yeah, like
travel,
that, right?
yeah, it's just like, man, the money just disappears sometimes. But you can get the Blair Society sponsors the rooms. I think the member or the admission fee is super discounted, and you just get so much exposure to these things. I think I look forward to a time when Blair's so prevalent on campuses. Because the other thing, John, that you and I have to worry about is one day we're going to want to retire. And so there might not always be someone ready to take up our offices. And that's the thing I'm realizing is like, I don't want little carbon copies of me. I want independent thinkers that are out there and willing to do it their way, but apply the principles of the Blair technique. And so I'm realizing like if I don't help students grow now, there's not going to be anybody to take over my clinic and see my patients when I'm gone.
Yeah, 100%. And there's always the passing of the torch, the proverbial passing of the torch that perpetuates anyone's ideas. And I think, as a credit to Dr. Blair, who wasn't necessarily as interested in promoting his work as others encouraged him to be, the truth of it and the efficacy of it, kind of speaks for itself. And so I think there will always be, folks to carry the torch. But like you said, we have this mission, within the society of, Blair to the world, and we want to have a Blair chiropractor in each community. But that being said, we still have, each of us folks driving 4 and 5 hours, one way. So there's a ton of opportunity for folks doing this work to be able to get implanted in a community, be successful, have a career that's very fulfilling, be supported by a community of like-minded, professionals that are developing, the work in real time. So yeah, I think it's a great time to be a Blair chiropractor. I'm excited as a younger doc to be able to kind of straddle both sides, which is, having all of the opportunity of the next 50 years, in front of us of practice experience, but also the wisdom of the folks that have come before us and have, a lifetime worth of knowledge and expertise that are so willing to share.
Yeah.
So I hope that, we're in a position later in life to be able to provide that for others. And maybe one day in, 30 years, we'll listen back on this podcast and, kind of chuckle about how foolish we sounded or, the
Probably gonna laugh
energy.
about it later today, actually. So.
Yeah. But I appreciate you being forthcoming and sharing. I know this was, a little bit more focused kind of on the student young doctor side, but I think that's, where we have a lot to offer because we're closer to students than, the folks that graduated from Palmer in the 60s, right? So we have a little bit more familiarity with what they're going through. And hopefully students or young docs that are listening found this inspiring, found it affirming, that there are folks out there that are familiar with what you're going through. There's a lot of support available to you. And ultimately, we're rooting for everybody. We want every Blair chiropractor to be the most successful in their community and to be a beacon of hope and healing. So what we're doing is trying to empower as many folks as we can with the awareness, but also the support, within the Blair Society. So, appreciate you being a part of our tribe and for taking some time out of your day to share with us this morning. But if there's anything else, as we're wrapping up here that you'd like to kind of end with, or any other, words of advice or wisdom, things that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to cover yet, we can definitely get that done.
Um, yeah, it's hard. I have an interest. I don't have a really linear line of thinking, as you may have noticed, but we I think the biggest thing is at the end of the day, when I go to bed and like when I go home and I'm done, I'm ready to shut it down. There's some really cool stuff that happens in an upper cervical office that I'm not sure that other chiropractors get to realize on a daily basis. And so, as a doctor, was wanting to come in a couple of days to shadow, I was looking at my schedule, just trying to figure out when a good time would be. And I was like, man, Thursday morning is an awesome morning. I've got 4 or 5 Meniere's patients coming in. I've got a couple of trigeminal neuralgia. Like everyone's doing exceptionally well. And like I'm just going through and I'm like thinking about not just names on the appointment slots, but there's some cool stories there. Like there's some really life-altering stuff that happened just on my Thursday morning patients, right? And so, and none of it's low back pain, none of it's the stuff that you hear about at your state conventions and stuff like that. And so, at the end of the day, I think I sleep so well, and I'm so grateful for Blair upper cervical in general, chiropractic in general, the innate healing potential of the body, all these different things that we get to work with and utilize. And it's just so cool to be able at the end of the day to go home, feel good about what you did, know you help people, you made a good living doing it, and there's every day from now until you're done to keep doing that. And so I in 5 years now, I'm starting to appreciate the amount of fulfillment I'm getting out of my chosen career path. Because now I'm not worried as much about paying the bills and those other gotta figure out things. It's just it's really a unique experience, and I don't know of any other profession where people are able to go to bed knowing they've impacted lives like we do.
100%, man. Couldn't end on a better note than that. So appreciate you, Alex. And maybe we'll follow up with you in the future and get some updates as life and practice evolves. But in the meantime, keep listening to the Blair Technique podcast. We've got a few more episodes coming out very soon that are from some OG Blair docs. So definitely going to want to keep an ear out for that, and keep an eye on blairtechnique.com for seminar opportunities and things like that. I have a sneaking suspicion Wolfe Family Chiropractic will be teaching Blair seminars in their facility at some time. So
Yeah.
to connect with Dr. Wolfe, we'll make sure you have all his contact information here. If you have questions, concerns, want to shadow him, take him up on that opportunity, or just want to say thank you for what he shared today. But we'll see you guys next time. Hang on and visit blairtechnique.com for all that information.